And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Wow, what a difference 1 week makes, what a difference one election makes. I imagine many of us will remember for many years to come, last Tuesday night, watching those election results come in, and then into Wednesday morning as the race was called for President Trump in such a dramatic way, such a dramatic difference than what was projected. And so, truly a remarkable moment in American politics with Trump's comeback. And I think that a number of opportunities for the Christian church as we move forward. I imagine many of you have read the polling numbers. You've looked into what occurred. My hope today is to step back just a little bit. We've had 1 week to process what has occurred and to talk a little bit about some of the greater trends, some reflections on the election, what happened, but then what's next for Christian citizens? What does this mean for our efforts in the public square? So kind of that second tier analysis of, all right, now we know what happened. What are the lessons and what do we do moving forward? So that's what I want to dive into today. By the way, because it was election day last week, I didn't want to necessarily dive into it or mention it too much, but on election day, we hit the 350 episode mark. That's crazy to me that we have done 350 of these episodes. Maybe that just means I don't know when to quit. But I have so enjoyed the podcast, the opportunity to connect with so many great people, great Christians that are working in the public square, trying to work out how do we do this? How do we have our allegiance to Christ and his kingdom, but be good citizens here? And thank you to tuning in for many of these episodes. I talk to folks from time to time that have been with us the whole time. And so thank you for that. I'm sure I would be tired of listening to myself or listening to me if that was 350 times. Maybe you've come on a little bit later on, just over the last year or so, and I just so appreciate the support and the comments, the encouragement that I receive as I'm out and about speaking to Christians. So as we dive into this, reflections on the election and what's next for Christian citizens as we think on the 2024 election and we look towards the future. So 3 thoughts today. The first one is that it definitely was a seismic win. Definitely just a unique moment. What a comeback story for President Trump. If you think just a few years back, it looked like he was going to be indicted, perhaps would be in jail. There was no prospect of a political future. So just looking at his story, it is a remarkable story of determination and grit and just remaining focused on a goal. As it sits today, recording this on Monday, November 11th, it appears that Trump will win the Electoral College by 312 to 226 Electoral College votes. But he also won the popular vote by 74.8 million votes. It's about 50.4% to Harris's 71.2 million votes, about 48%. So he carries both the Electoral College and the popular vote. And I'll tell you, many of the pastors I spoke to over the last couple of months were praying that biblical values would be supported, that we would have a president that would promote the created order, but also we're praying that there would be a clear victory so that there would be a transition of power that was without controversy, that the United States just needed a moment to kind of breathe after 2020 with COVID and George Floyd and then the election. And if you remember that as a church leader or as a Christian, that all of that occurred. And then January 6th. And so having a clear win in the Electoral College, but also for the popular vote, I think that is very good for the American system as a whole, just as we look forward. And we've talked about these Lincoln-esque questions. Can such a republic hold together with such deep disagreements? And it appears with Harris conceding, I believe that Trump's going to be meeting with President Biden at the White House and that there's going to be just an orderly transition of power. So the American experiment moves forward. So that's certainly something to be thankful for. Also in the Senate, the GOP Republican Party gained 4 seats. So it appears it's going to be 53 Republicans with 46 in the Democratic caucus. There's a senator of the caucuses with the Democrats. And then in the House, it appears it's going to be 214 Republican House members to 203. So the Republicans picked up 4 seats in the Senate and probably 2 in the House. Now, again, these things have not been certified yet, but that's what it appears to be. And so I think about the American Republic. There's an old adage that republics last maybe 200 years, maybe 250 years, and then they perish because democracies are hard to hold together. Self-government requires self-control. And so there has been talks of, the end of the American Republic. And that our influence is waning, that we're done, that our best years are behind us. And I think this election signifies, hey, we're going strong. We have our challenges for sure. But as we look at our 250th birthday as a country, that we have, I think, a bright opportunity here to move into the future. Certainly challenges, but I think it does signal that. So, a couple of things that I took away from the election. I'm sure many of you have mulled over these. I was just trying to pull together a few key thoughts as we process this and look towards the future. One thing that this election certainly did is that it exposed a false narrative about this claim that demography is destiny. If you may have heard this general thought before, that, well, as America becomes less white, is the general thought, like as it becomes less white, as the minorities have more babies and those populations grow, that it's just going to lock in a democratic supermajority and a secular future for the United States, and there's really nothing that can be done. And if you look at the younger vote, that's going to be true as well. And I think that this election certainly exposed that as a false narrative. Among the Hispanic vote, Trump was up by about 13 points, certainly with Hispanic men. Also, with black men, that an increasing number of them voting for Trump. With that particular demographic, 3 in 10 black men voted for Trump. Half of Hispanic men, roughly, voted for Trump. And then among the youth vote, 18 to 29, 52% voted for Harris and 46% voted for Trump. That's crazy. I mean, if you think about the general or perceived or received wisdom about the youth vote, there's no way that would happen. I mean, you look at college campuses, etc. And then among young men and young women, there certainly is this gender gap, with young women voting 58% for Harris and young men voting 56% for Trump. So there's definitely this developing gender gap, something to be studied and thought over. One of my colleagues and friends, Ben Scheller, who's been on the podcast before, was reflecting on what this means for even ministry to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. A lot to be unpacked there, but not to be afraid of talking about tough cultural issues that young people want to know. They want to know what the Bible says. They are invested in things. They want to have these hard conversations. And that would certainly line up with the anecdotal evidence that I have from speaking to college groups and to young people over the last few months, that they're invested. Many of them, this was their first election. They're invested. They want to know what's going on. They want to make an informed vote. So much to unpack there. But I do think that it exposed this false narrative that demography is destiny, and that the votes of folks are up for grabs, and we are full, complex people, and that no party should just assume by having a certain set of policies that they're just going to lock in the vote of a group. Another, I think, encouraging development from this election is that it exposed a false narrative about the acceptance of transgenderism. And you think even maybe just 2 to 3 years ago, how almost no one could say anything about transgenderism. All right, we just have to accept it. You have to use the preferred name, the preferred pronoun, and failure to do that is transphobia. And and all of the medical experts are lining up. You have to affirm, or it's going to harm, and you could even lead to suicide if you're not affirming. And that's just what is the polite, accepted thing to say in society. And I think this election was a strong rejection of that premise. And in fact, President Trump, there have been a number of talks about this particular ad that was run during football games. And the close of it was this: Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you. What a brilliant marketing strategy. And just going back to the created order, we've talked about this so many times on the podcast, that if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. This is one of the most central things in Scripture. Genesis 1, 26 and 27, the image of God made he them, male and female created he them, and that this was just a step too far for Americans to accept. Now, there's much more to be said about that, and to certainly work on, as social change sometimes just takes time, and I don't think the lesson is we've ultimately won that issue. There's much work to be done there, but at least for now, it was too far, too fast, and Americans pushed back on that. One other fascinating exchange, I'm not sure if you saw this, you can find it online, but it was a discussion in between Shermichael Singleton on a CNN And it's a discussion between Singleton and a panel. And there's another panelist named Jay Michelson that was on there. And by the way, Sure Michael Singleton is black. Jay Michelson is white. And Sure Michael Singleton just said, hey, a lot of voters, they said that, hey, having girls or having boys and girls sports, that's a non-starter. And again, so a black man saying this, and Jay Singleton just calls him out as a white man, calls him transphobic. Says, "How dare you? That's triggering. That you shouldn't be saying these things." You can listen to the full interview yourself. And eventually, Shermichael kind of backed off just a little bit, but said, "Hey, people just aren't buying this. This wasn't something that the American people have accepted." And so we look for hard data confirmed trends. I think many Christians, myself included, have kind of sensed that there's a change among people in our churches and general culture as to this transgender revolution, and just accepting, all right, a teenager declares themselves to be a gender different their biological sex. We all just have to go along. We have to accept this, and we have to reject the evidence of our eyes. When we look at, say, a women's swim team, and here's a biological male swimming against biological women, this is against the created order. And I think that this election is some hard data that is actually true. What we perceive is actually true. Much work to be done, but I think that is certainly something to celebrate. Another development in this election is churches and pastors. And some of this is anecdotal, but I want to give you a specific example as well. The 2024 election involved issues that were inescapably moral. And I will link to an editorial or op-ed that I actually sent in to Christian Post, and they put it up, talking about how the 2024 election contained inescapably moral issues. And when you have a spiritual issue, you have a spiritual problem, you need spiritual guidance. And many pastors for a number of years have said, hey, I don't want to get involved in this, kind of hands off. We don't want to be seen as overtly partisan. But then culture comes knocking, politics comes knocking. We are in a world that involves moral issues that increasingly are political. And it's not like we're just voting on how are we going to pave over potholes or what the tax rate is. No, the political issues at play in this election were abortion, transgenderism, talking about immigration. All of these things are inherently moral issues. No surprise, we're to do all to the honor and glory of God. Scripture applies to all of life. And so I saw an increasing willingness among pastors to just step up and say, hey, these are moral issues. We're going to speak to the moral issue. We're going to encourage you to vote according to your conscience. And so I was encouraged by, I think, the increasing engagement by churches and church leaders. And as we look to the future, this isn't going to change anytime soon. And so let's stop being afraid of that. Discipleship is the command to the Great Commission, and citizenship is one aspect of discipleship. So let's forget what the world tries to label us, what people are trying to label us as, and lead. The church needs to lead out on this. We're to be the moral voice of our society. And I think this election signaled an opportunity and the need for that. I was so grateful for a colleague of mine in Pennsylvania, Kurt Weaver. He's been on the podcast before. And I just want to share a few results. Now, understand that Pennsylvania, as you know, watching the results, was a key battleground state. And Trump won the state by 2%. That's 142,000 votes. That is such a small margin electorally. And just listen to what Kurt and his team did through the Church Ambassador Network. I lead that similar effort here in Indiana, and then through the Good Citizen Project around the country. But my colleague in Pennsylvania hosted 12 Pray for Pennsylvania tour stops all around Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh and in between. They called around 3,000 churches, spoke with pastors and staff to give them tools this election season. Almost 1,000 churches downloaded their Choose Well 2024 election toolkit and utilized their voter guides. As an organization as a whole, they distributed over 100,000 voter guides around Pennsylvania. And again, Trump won that state by 2%, 142,000 votes. So I do think that engaging the church can and did make a difference. Now, who knows, where those 142,000 votes exactly landed, but I do think the church speaking up, saying, hey, this is important. These are worldview, created order type issues, and this is going to make a difference. Just one other story or anecdote that I found encouraging just on Saturday night, I had an opportunity to present to a leadership team for a church that is in an urban area. And that leadership team is multi-ethnic. We walked through kind of good citizen, the good citizen guide, the 4 steps to Christian citizenship. They had gone through the book already and had just a fascinating conversation about how they were discipling folks in an urban inner city church, which you would think, all right, well, if it's in an inner city, and these are completely stereotypes, right? And we know from this election that those stereotypes don't hold. But all right, urban area, deep blue, suburban, rural, deep red, is generally the assumption. But as this church is just discipling folks, they just go back to the Bible. They encourage people to think about biblical principles and then pick the candidate that is close to those biblical principles. And as I listened to some of those leaders, many of or several of them young black men, talking about how they thought through elections and how they were processing it and talking with their families, I was just so encouraged by the opportunity of the church to break down some of these buckets or categories that we all get shoved in. Like, all right, you're this, and so you're going to vote that way, and to let the parties know that, hey, as believers, we're going to follow the Bible. And so if you want our support, then you're going to have to think biblically. You're going to have to think about what's important morally. So I was very encouraged by that. Something else I was just going to point out was just the faith vote, how people of faith voted in the 2024 election. And one of the significant changes was that in the Catholic vote, 56% voted for Trump, while 41% voted for Harris. And in the evangelical world, the support of Trump held pretty steady at about 81, 82%. Among Black Protestants, it was 8 in 10 or 80% supported Harris, about 15% supported Trump. About 69% of Jewish voters supported Harris, 30% supported Trump. That was another significant development. 2/3 of Muslims voted for Harris, 1/3 supported Trump. 6 in 10 Mormons supported Trump, and 7 in 10 non-religious voters supported Harris. So those are just a couple of ideas, and there's some pretty significant shifts in there among specifically Jewish voters and Catholic voters that swung towards Trump. The last thing that I'll say, so I said it's number one, this is a seismic win. This is a massive change in opportunity in American politics. And I think everyone that saw the results last week gets that. From a spiritual perspective, I do recognize that God is sovereign. And so when I think of President Trump, President-elect Trump, God tells us in Daniel that he, God himself, changes the times and seasons. He removes kings. He sets up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know. And so I do believe that in elections, that there is this mysterious, like we elect folks, we cast votes, but then there's this mysterious thing that where God appoints. So this election and appointment by God go hand in hand. And how that happens is above my ability to figure it out, above my pay grade in a sense. But I believe from Scripture that is absolutely true. And so just thinking through, we don't know exactly what all of this means, but I do sense that it can be a reprieve from a just secular American future where ministries are getting just pummeled, getting sued over just following what the Bible says. And we talked last time about Harris, and some of her legacy was to go after pregnancy care centers and fully pushing, Title IX, forcing public schools to have men and women's sports, that sort of thing. And so I do see this as a bit of a reprieve, an opportunity to think about an American future that where religious liberty does flourish, where the created order is supported in culture and in policy. Now, this is not so much a victory as it is an opportunity. I'll say that again. This isn't so much a victory as it is an opportunity. It's just the open door to walk through to go make a difference. But when I think of our ministry and specifically what God's called me to do, and I have for a number of years, I'll just admit, there have been some dark moments. There have been, long nights on the road, speaking in churches, being away from family some, that where it's just, wow, where's this place going? I want to spend my life more as a Nehemiah figure, not comparing myself to him, but like more as a Nehemiah, like a wall builder, rather than a Jeremiah, which was basically, hey, you're there to prophesy to these folks. They're not going to listen to you, but you just be faithful because I have to have a faithful witness. And we don't know how things are going to turn from here, but I am so encouraged as I've just been praying through and just being grateful for this opportunity of, well, what if the future could look different? What if there are opportunities to systematically change some things so that biblical principles are promoted, where we flourish according to God's good design, where religious liberty is defended, where life is protected. And so there's this opportunity, this window. And so I am so grateful for that. So I just wanted to, I'm sure many of you have been thinking along the same lines, but I just wanted to underline that, put some exclamation points behind it. What an opportunity. And we didn't know this a week ago. And so things have certainly changed. All right, so that would be the first thing I would say. That was a seismic win for President Trump. And I think that brings a lot of opportunity. And again, this is the individual that God has clearly chosen to be the president of the United States. So we need to pray for him, pray for his administration. We certainly pray for President Biden as he concludes as well. So number two, I would say, is that it was a serious setback. All right. So the first one, a seismic win. Number two, a serious setback. I'm sorry, I'm going to be compulsively alliterating today. It happens sometimes. I try not to, but it happens. It just comes out. So in this ministry, we try to be hopeful realists. We're so grateful for opportunities. I just walk through those. But we also have to be realistic. And this election did come with some very serious setbacks, specifically for the life issue, but also for marriage and for school choice. So again, we want to be clear-eyed. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And the biggest one that I see is for the life issue moving forward. So essentially, evangelical Christians voted for Trump about 81%. And Trump won the election without actually making the life issue a plank in his platform. So the Republican Party had removed it from the platform. They said, hey, we're going to make this a state issue. And then Trump himself would not clarify what his vote on issue number 4 in Amendment 4 in Florida, which had to do with enshrining the right to abortion in the Florida Constitution. He would not clarify his position. And so if we just walk through this, this is a game of power. This is a game of influence. And what is the secret sauce that got us here into the White House? And what is the secret sauce that's going to keep us in power as we move forward? And I am gravely concerned that the lesson that the Republican Party is going to take from this is that the life issue is not necessary for political power as we look towards the future. I just kind of let that sink in for a moment. And this is a huge change for decades of the Republican Party's platform. And now Trump just pulled that off. There certainly was no loss of evangelical support. So I think the lesson that the Republican Party will take is, hey, we can get their support without promoting the life issue, without being really strong on that issue. Now, am I grateful for opportunities that we've talked about already? Yes. But I think that is a serious issue. And because of Trump's win, the dramatic effect of this, the opportunities it presents for people of faith, I'm not sure that there's been enough. It's kind of quiet. Like everyone's like, yay. And that many of those that would support life, though, are like, well, hold on a second. I think we at least have to acknowledge that could have a profound impact on politics as we move forward. Now, maybe there's an opportunity to provide accountability. And on the even Amendment 4 issue, there was a lot of pushback on Trump when he said he was not going to support it. And then he changed his position. But then on election day, well, I'm not going to clarify what I did. Also, there were 10 states that had life issues on their ballots. And so these would have been Florida, Nebraska, South Dakota, Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, Missouri, New York, and Nevada. And only 3 states voted to protect life, most notably in Florida. But notice that what happened here is that in Florida, voters had to vote by over 60%, by at least 60% to change the Constitution. And only 57.2% voted in favor of changing it to enshrine abortion rights. So this is significant, like 3% more, less than 3% more, and the Florida Constitution would have been changed. So these are grave concerns. Now, at least it broke the win streak of these amendments around the country, and maybe we'll give the pro-abortion cause a moment to pause and say, well, should we go forward with this? But then in Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, Missouri, New York, and Nevada, these issues passed. Now, Nevada has to do it a second time, my understanding, in another election for it to actually become law, to actually change the Constitution. But these are grave concerns. The life issue remains a concern. People just aren't where we had hoped they would be after the Dobbs case. and there's much work to be done there. Now, in just discussing these things with people, much of the conversation just goes around, well, this was just pragmatic, that the party knew because of like these results that a pro-life position was going to be a losing position. Now, I am not convinced of that, but many will say that that was a pragmatic decision, and that was part of what got them into office. And therein lies my concern about where does this issue go moving forward. So there's much work to be done on the life front, and I think that's something that pro-life Americans and Christians are going to need to provide accountability to the administration as we move forward. Now, the goal there really would be to protect life all around the country, and we have much work to be done. Something else that occurred was in California, Colorado, and Hawaii. The voters removed the marriage protection. So, if you remember, prior to Obergefell, the case that enshrined same-sex marriage as a right in American law, that there were a number of states that actually passed constitutional amendments to say that marriage is between a man and a woman. So just understand that, I mean, voters, a majority of voters went to the polls and said, hey, we're going to take that out. We no longer believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman. Now, because as Christians, we believe that the family is fundamental to human flourishing. It's something that God designed, and that we go away from it at our peril. This is certainly concerning. And there is really no national movement at all because of the Obergefell case to try to protect marriage as God defines it. And so this is something, as we look down the road, this is gravely concerning. So this was another moral issue, a serious setback in those states. Also, in Colorado, Kentucky, and Nebraska, proponents of school choice lost their efforts. So specifically Kentucky, because it's so close to home, there is not a voucher program. There's not a way that parents can take the money that would be designated towards their child and to take that money and to give it to a private school so that their child can be raised up in a religious school. So unfortunately, in Colorado, Kentucky, and Nebraska, those options lost. Those efforts lost. And so what does that say about the kind of monopoly that the public schools have on not only training kids up in STEM subjects, but also forming their worldview? So that was concerning. There were certainly individuals I know in Kentucky that were hoping that this would change the dynamics. So those were concerning. And also in marijuana efforts, you had Nebraska that said yes to 2 amendments, but then you had North Dakota, South Dakota, and Florida that rejected these efforts. So these are all some, the marijuana legislation kind of went, I would say, towards the way that it should, other than in Nebraska, which is kind of interesting to me. But as we look at the election, this did come with some serious setbacks, and specifically in the life issue. We know, as just a concern in our ministry, that just 18% of households in the United States are nuclear families with a married couple and children, down from 40% in 1970. We know that 85% of youth in prison grow up in a fatherless home. We're going to have a podcast episode on this soon. And Time Magazine recently celebrated the good life as individuals with dual income, no kids, the dinks, as it's often framed. And that's the good life. And so where does the American family go? I mean, we're looking at the life issue. We're looking at marriage. These are grave concerns. And they weren't even top of the ticket when, as believers, I think we have to say these are fundamental problems for our society. So on one hand, it was a seismic win. On another, there are some serious setbacks that we need to be mindful of. We need to watch. And then I would say finally that it is a sobering responsibility. As I said, this isn't so much a victory as it is an opportunity, and one that we should not miss. So it is an opportunity, I think, to restructure government in some significant ways. There's some way to push back big government, in a sense, back to the more original view of the founding fathers. And as we know that local government's going to be doing a better job of administering, ruling over people, maintaining order, that there's this new federalism since the Dobbs case, and that our states are in a better position to do these things. And so this is it. Like we often complain. I have certainly said things and looked at the structure of all of these different departments, and how specifically Department of Education has just put this, cranks down on religious liberty in the schools, and forcing some mandates on schools. And so if we complain about these things, President Trump is coming in with a mandate, I think, from the American people to make this some significant changes. So let's not mess that up. A couple of things that I would just note and kind of I'm going to be watching for. I'm sure you're watching some of these as well. Something immediate: protection of girls in women's sports. This is a Title IX issue. There has been no congressional, no legislation, no congressional action, no legislation on this issue, nor even a court case that specifically from the Supreme Court held that, yes, we have to allow boys into girls' sports. Much of this has been done through the Department of Education, through executive branch or executive orders that are then sent to the schools as guidance. And the schools are, they perhaps don't necessarily want to go along, but they're going to be told by their counsel, hey, you have to follow this or you're opening yourself up to lawsuits. And so now's the time to do something about this issue. I think the voters have been very clear. That clear part of that mandate is, no, we need to protect the created order. We need to protect these vulnerable women that are in sporting opportunities. And if you just look at some of these stories like Leah Thomas and others, it's clear that change is needed. Another issue that I think we're going to see is immigration. This certainly was a big part of what President Trump had mentioned even today, that President Trump appointed his former immigration or border czar, as the position is known. And I think for the church, this is going to be a really important opportunity to teach, but also to encourage government. And I did sign a letter. This was an open letter put out by World Relief to both parties. And the encouragement was that whoever is in power, that they would observe three core principles and be mindful that as evangelical Christians, that this is what they would believe, what evangelical Christians believe. And the first one is that immigrants, like all human beings, are made in the image of God and have innate dignity. And so these policies should respect the innate dignity of those that are immigrants. The next one, point number 2, was that evangelicals want secure and orderly borders. 91% of evangelicals say that. We affirm the biblical teaching that God has ordained government and is responsible to ensure order and safety. The bullet points in this letter go, in recent years, there have been a record number of apprehensions of individuals who have unlawfully crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, as well as an increased number who have entered unlawfully without being apprehended, amplifying the risk. We believe that our government can and must both maintain a secure, orderly border and protect those fleeing persecution. The last one is that evangelical Christians would oppose immigration policies that separate families. Certainly in the policies back in 2018, where there was a zero tolerance policy, often parents were separated from children. There's a way to do this without separating the families at the border. And then that even in the deportation scenarios, a lot's going to have to be thought through on who is pushed out. How do you maintain that family unit? And so it's easy to say, hey, fix immigration or just build the wall. But if you understand immigration policy, a lot of what happens is people just walk up to the wall, declare that they have a reasonable fear of return to their country. They follow asylum claims and then are paroled into the United States, sometimes with a court hearing many years later. So this is going to be a complex issue, but I think the church can jump in, and we have this really unique opportunity to say, hey, government is a God-ordained institution, and we need to have an orderly immigration system. We need to know who's in our country, and the law needs to be followed. But also to say that anyone that's here, regardless of their status, they're fellow image bearers, and as believers, as Christians, we need to care for them. And so we have this really unique opportunity as Christian citizens, I think, to explain that to our churches, to our neighbors, and to get something done on this issue. We all know that there's a problem, and there's an opportunity to get something done here. Something that the Trump campaign did not talk about, so I don't foresee this actually being done unless citizens really push it, is the size and spending of government. We're up to $36 trillion in the national debt. And we know from history, certainly the British Empire was bankrupted over time. Generally, World War I was seen as a major cause of that. But we have to get our financial house in order. And I'm so encouraged by Elise Nishala, who is, in a sense, the comptroller, CFO of Indiana. And this is something that she's really working on here in Indiana, which is a great financial model. but also even speaking into the national scene. So the size of government. Something else that I see as an issue that could have profound impact moving forward is just replacing aging justices on the Supreme Court. And we have Alito, who's 74, Thomas, who is 76. They're still going strong, but you never know, what could happen in an individual's health and what might happen 4 years from now. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, many have said that she should have retired when she had an opportunity to, but then when she passed away, that she was replaced by a justice with a differing judicial philosophy. And so the encouragement is let's not have that happen here. Roberts is also 69, Chief Justice Roberts. It does not seem like there would be any attempt for him to retire at this point. But Sotomayor is also, she's age 70. My understanding, though, is that her health is not real strong. And so there's a lot of talk about how do you maintain the Supreme Court so that religious liberty, the life, is defended moving forward. And so this is a huge win for opportunities to do that, to assure a future where religious freedom is protected, where life is protected as well. A case to watch in the coming weeks is Scarametti. This is the case where Tennessee banned puberty-blocking drugs or transgender surgeries for minors. And so the oral arguments for that is coming up in December. And I think just from the kind of culture-wide, what is the message that the voters are sending to DC? And that is that, hey, this is a step too far. So it'll be fascinating to listen to those oral arguments and to see how that case is decided. Certainly, it's important to hold Trump's feet to the fire, his administration's feet to the fire on the life issue, where they may say, hey, it was from the campaign's perspective, they would say, we believe it was necessary to say, hey, this is a state issue to be able to get the office. But if you still say that you support life, then let's take steps to make sure that occurs. And certainly the major issue there is mifepristone, these abortion drugs that are getting sent across state lines, even in states that have abortion bans. And that can, as things cross state lines, those of you, following the Commerce Clause, hey, that's a federal issue. So I think there's room to do things there. Also, parental rights. It's time to get something done to protect parental rights. We've talked a lot about that on the podcast, that parents raising their kids according to their beliefs, that is not abuse, that is not neglect. They should not be subject to the state coming into their home. And one last thing that I'll just mention is that for our churches and our own zip codes, I think this is an amazing opportunity to lean in. I think in the last couple of years, maybe this is a 10, 20-year development, just it seems like there's a fear of talking about issues with our neighbors. There's a fear of preaching on biblical principles because they're seen as political. And if we want to have a church that reflects the demographics of our neighborhood, well, we gotta pull that back. We gotta pull it back. We can't talk about those issues. But I think this election actually signals no. People want to know the word. They want to hear Scripture, and we should not be afraid of just sharing the word. That the word is going to speak to all peoples. Look at the church in Acts. And so being fearful of speaking about biblical principles with the impression that it's going to be political and it's going to scare someone off, I think that's unfounded. And we now have strong evidence that is true, that many minorities voted for Trump and he was just promoting principles. So we like to put people in boxes, and it's easy to fall into stereotypes myself, but just seeing each person as a complex individual made in the image of God, and be confident that what is good for them is the gospel. And the Scripture is going to cut at us just like it cuts at all people. But to me, this result had some really profound, not just political implications, but cultural implications, and even discipleship and ministry implications. So I think for our churches and for Christian citizens, I see this as an opportunity. It is the doors open for us to be able to make some systemic changes so that over the next 20 to 30 years, we can see biblical principles promoted. We can see things go forward. And as I come to a close today, I have had a sense for a number of years as I talk on citizenship with a lot of Christians, it's just kind of a shoulder shrug. We've lost this place. We lost the culture war. Let's just focus on our local churches and our institutions and forget the rest of this place. It's too dirty, too dark, can't get anything done. If we take any lesson from this election, may it be that there is opportunity. There is a chance to work to renew the American republic, that God has placed us here in this place. We didn't create the might, the influence, the freedom that we have in the United States, but we are here as stewards of it. And that demands more than a shrug. So I've been encouraged just by talking with folks over the last week, like, oh, I can get involved in politics. I can engage, and there is an opportunity to make a difference. So yes, please, more of that. All right. So I think the next couple of years are an amazing opportunity. Let's see it for the seismic shift that it was. Let's be sober about the lesson, certainly on the life issue, and let's hold this administration accountable to doing things biblically. And then it's a sobering responsibility. Let's get to work. This is not a, hey, I checked the box, I voted, and therefore I get to leave it up to everyone. No, this is an opportunity for you to engage in your local school board, in your state, and with your congressman, your congresswoman, and to encourage change. This is a remarkable opportunity. I think perhaps a reprieve from some of these secular ideological, the worldview issues that we thought, well, are these things going to be enshrined for years to come? Now's an opportunity to actually make a significant difference. So those are some reflections from the 2024 elections. I would love to hear yours, joshuagoodcitizen.us. Maybe if you think I missed an opportunity or a big development, I'd love to hear your feedback. But overall, I'm just encouraged by what this, I think, symbolizes, or what this election says about the future of the U.S. I think it is an opportunity for American Christians to engage and to help renew this republic as we look towards the future. And so for that, I am grateful. All right, we'll be back with you next week.